All right, good afternoon. I'm John Radovan, former Deputy Director of the Air Force AI Accelerator and current Public Sector Director for MIT Open Learning. Throughout the day, we've heard how artificial intelligence is continuing to reshape the healthcare landscape. We also need to distinguish between its transformative potential and overhyped promises. Today's closing fireside chat will explore the future of healthcare, the evolving role of AI, and how to leverage these technologies responsibly. Today I have with me Chris Coburn, Mass General Brigham Chief Innovation Officer, and Joe Pedro, Microsoft's Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Health and Life Sciences Solutions and Platforms. So let's jump right in and get to the heart of the discussion. AI advances seem to be happening on a daily basis. How do you identify practical, high-impact AI applications for healthcare? Tell us about your strategy. Let's start with Joe.
Hey, folks. So it's actually not that complicated, and I don't think that generative AI changed things much, to be honest with you. I think the confusion over the course of the last couple of years is that people started to get confused that AI is the product, and AI really isn't the product. AI is literally a feature of the product. And so one of the things that we recommend is that there's kind of two cohorts of use cases that you should look at. One are what we would consider moonshots, right? These are the things that create the most trouble, by the way, because if all you do is focus on the moonshots, and this is like some kind of a diagnostic condition that has been a holy grail problem that folks have been chasing for a really, really long time. You don't know if you have technical feasibility for it. You don't know if you have the data for it. There is room for those types of use cases. The problem is that when executive teams show up, when boards of trustees, when boards of directors are really pushing on executive teams to do something in AI, they tend to focus there. What you really need is a much richer pipeline of use cases that don't really sound like a use case that is going to change the world, but it's a use case that is actually going to contribute value to the things that you're doing. These are what I call meat and potato use cases. Things like administrative use cases. How do you assist developers? How do you assist researchers? How do you put co-pilots in everybody's hands? Clinical assistants. And the focus really is co-pilot, not autopilot. So the co-pilot is a way to augment a professional's contribution to what they do on the day-to-day, how to actually relieve burden and increase productivity. And you need a super rich pipeline of those. And one of the things that I recommend to executive teams in a general sense is that when you look at the entire portfolio of AI things that you're chasing, there has to be a nice blend of that. Because if all you do is you focus on the moonshots, you might not actually live to tell the story 3 years from now, because you lose you lose the interest of your executive team for the support. The other thing that I recommend too is that the executive teams that are making decisions around what use cases to chase, they need to know what AI does. And so one of the things I recommend is I usually ask for a raise of hands. How many people have used Copilots or ChatGPT or something like that? All right, this is good. So that's my recommendation, is continue to use it, continue to get familiar with it. You'll start to understand what it's good at, what it's not good at, and that'll basically help you contribute to the pipeline of use cases that you're actually trying to develop.
Outstanding. Chris, you have a large team.
I would agree with everything Joe said, maybe frame it slightly differently. I think the most important thing, at least if you're sitting in an academic or clinical center like ours, is understand what you're trying to do. And typically it's going to group into one or two categories. You're going to try to do things better that you're doing right now, or you're trying to achieve things that you have never been able to do before. And framing it that way against the key categories of delivering care, doing research, trying to figure out new ways to create drugs, and then running a giant organization. So you're going to try to achieve benefits in those primary categories, at least in our view, in those two groupings. Things you do today and things you've never been able to do because the technology lets you achieve that.
Outstanding. I love that idea around framing. So let's discuss areas where you're winning. Like, share a good story. How did you and your team solve a big challenge?
I'm part of the overhead, so I'm not, but to talk about a couple of our clinicians. Lee Hochberg is a critical care neurologist who's done some unbelievable work using AI and ML to unlock folks that are completely paralyzed in terms of their ability to have a computer interface. And this isn't something in the future. This is happening today. So he brings in patients, whether they're suffering from trauma or he's made a lot of progress in areas like ALS. So it's very exciting. On the administrative end, I think I mentioned this before, we work with Nuance/Microsoft and also a really cool emerging company called Bridge. This is ambient documentation. So a clinician engages a patient. They have a recording device between them. Within 60 seconds, and usually it's closer to 30 seconds, a fully composed note, in the classic structure is delivered. And that, in terms of the quality of care, but also importantly in today's environment, being able to prevent, hopefully, or reduce the level of burnout, where so many clinicians are stuck late in the evening, composing notes. And now to get something that is really on the first cut is remarkably well constructed. Not finished, not perfect, but most of the way there. So we had a pilot of 20. That jumped up to about 150. Now we have 800 clinicians just in our pilot to evaluate the technology. So it's exciting for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're talking back. My wife's a registered nurse, and so definitely can understand the cognitive side. Joe, how about you?
Thanks for the assist. So, I think DAX is, as we call it, Dragon Ambient Experience. That's the co-pilot that Chris was actually talking about. It's fascinating, the story, by the way. So about 8 to 10 years ago, a guy named Karl Dvorak, he's the president of Epic, who's the most, recognized EMR, particularly in the United States. He sat us down and he said, wouldn't it be great if a room could listen to a conversation between a patient and a physician and automatically generate the clinical documentation? And we talked about it for a while, and I walked out of there, and I was with one of my folks that runs strategy, and I said, that's a great idea. I have no idea how we're going to actually do that. So think about this. Go back 10 years. There was no AI that could do this, not even close. There was no data to train the models on. There was no recorded patient-to-physician conversation, and there was no way to bridge that gap between this kind of colloquial, sloppy, not a clinical conversation, but a patient-to-physician conversation that had some clinical stuff in it, and actually create the clinical documentation. It seemed like a bridge too far. And when we walked out of there, we realized, where do we even start? And this was, I'm going to go against what I actually just said about picking a moonshot. This was a moonshot of moonshots. And so the first thing we had to do is we bought a scribing company. These are human beings that go into a room and actually create the documentation as the patient and the physician are actually speaking. And we started to record patient and physician conversations. We started to develop a huge amount of data. We had about 1.5 million episodes of care at one point in time put into this data repository. Now fast forward to today. If you think about DAX Copilot, we got ChatGPT about 2 years ago. We went from 0 to what we call a proof of concept in June of last year. We released it in October, and today there's tens of thousands of physicians using it. There's 500 health care systems that have signed up for it. And that's the kind of thing that generative AI does for you. If you pick the right use case nowadays, it can really shorten that time frame. And it's had an exceptional result in a really profound change in experience for physicians. It reduces clinical documentation time by about 50%. 85% of the patients think that the experience is better. So it's really, really profound. And it's just in its nascency, and it's really, really going to take off. So it's been a profound success.
Two quick comments on that. We were one of the customers for those human-driven documentation companies, the scribes. And so for years, we contracted, had relationships with these companies where they would have dozens, if not hundreds of staff, usually in another country, taking the audio feed and trying to create the notes. And it was never quite could move the needle. So now to think that from a software standpoint that's possible is just really remarkable. And from our standpoint, it's the kind of game changer that's going to stay. But just going back to the hype side, Epic and others showed up with a parallel technology for automating your inbox. That hasn't been quite, at least for us, it has not had nearly the effect that the ambient documentation has.
So I'm curious to some of the challenges that you faced. I mean, because starting something new in an environment like this, I mean, how did you navigate through all the organizational stuff to launch something like this?
It's a super interesting question. It's a sloppy triage kind of a process. I mean, there's a discipline around it. The problem is when you pick something where you don't actually have technical feasibility yet, you can end up searching for a long time. And sometimes the hardest problem that a company has is when to bail out. So the companies that I've been with, I'm with Microsoft now, but I was with Nuance as well. We would never give up on something. We just kept going and going and going and pouring money into it. And that's really how we got to a speech engine that actually worked. So, we created something called Dragon Medical One. It's got 650,000 physicians on it today. About 65% of the physicians use it in the US. 2/3 of the radiologists use the same technology. If we weren't crazy enough to continue to pour money on that, it never would have taken off. We had to be a little bit crazy to continue to do that over so many years. I think nowadays, there's a much stronger discipline around it. And when you're assessing technical feasibility, you have to ask yourself questions. Do you have the data? Is this a problem that's well understood? Is it a deterministic problem, or is it full of ambiguities? How do human beings solve it? Do human beings actually even know how to solve it, or are they struggling with it too? If you pick a problem that has a lack of data, has a lack of the ability for a human being to solve it, you're basically setting yourself up for failure. So I think it's this thing where you have to create the discipline and you have to try to roadmap the way science actually advances. One of the things we got into at Dragon Medical One is we knew we could make the relative error rate of speech yield at about 15% relative every single year. We knew we had a 15% relative gain. And I want you to think about this. When I started at Nuance 15 or 20 years ago, the accuracy of Dragon Medical One, which is the leading speech engine in the country right now, was 85%. If I were to put a speech engine that has 85% accuracy in front of you today to order pizzas, you would completely reject it. You would run out of the room screaming. That's how used to we've all gotten that speech is actually incredibly accurate. But we developed a discipline around it. We continue to advance it, and I think that's key. But you do have to know when you should stay committed and when you should give up on the problem.
And so, Chris, to that point, what are the 3 things that you needed to get alignment on to launch it as the customer side of the house?
Well, just the point I think Joe is making. So much of this, at least for us in an organization with 85,000 employees, does get into the dynamics of how things get prioritized. And I would say, just that point from earlier, you got to think about us. We're a creator of technology. We're a massive user. We're a huge client. Literally, we spend billions of dollars a year to acquire technology from others. So you've got the technology in the use of care, delivery of care, technology to run the organization, things that are being developed by our faculty, 7,000 Harvard-appointed faculty, who are using it across the board. It's so exciting just to sit down with a collection of folks who are representative across multiple disciplines. Every single one. It'd be hard for me to think about a faculty member who doesn't have something going on in the use of the technology. It might be small, but for a lot of them, it's pretty fundamental. So to answer your question, John, regarding it's setting priorities in the category you're in. If you're a laboratory investigator, you control most of that, assuming someone wants to fund your research. On the clinical side, obviously, it's driven primarily by safety. And then efficacy. And then on the administrative, a good thing is you can experiment, you can utilize new technologies in a way the other parts of the organization don't allow. And, we've been doing that. So I think of us and our environment as almost without limit in terms of the appetite the ability to sort and prioritize is the key.
Yeah, another really good point about this too, by the way, is surprisingly, the thing that makes technology fail sometimes has nothing to do at all with technology. And the way I talk about this in a general sense is most of these problems nowadays are people, process, and technology. Sometimes the people aren't ready for it. Sometimes you're putting the people through a paradigm shift that they're not ready for. Sometimes you haven't prepared them for that. You haven't adjusted your process to adopt the technology. And then there's the technology piece of it. And I think when you pick a problem that's really hairy across every single one of those dimensions, I think your failure rate goes way up. And so I think this is one of the things that I think executive teams in a general sense are not prepared for. It's not just a technology problem anymore. It's the people on the process side of it. And those two dimensions, those two extra dimensions are the things that sometimes dooms a project before it actually even leaves the gates.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, when I used to do AI training for general officers, we used to tell them it's not a technology problem. It's a cultural and organizational problem. And that brings us up to our next question on, let's talk hype, and level set AI for the audience. What are some telltale signs of hype, and what strategies you use to avoid these costly missteps? Let's start with Chris.
Well, I think Joe was touching on this before. Sometimes the momentum around hype starts outside of the organization. Folks that are inputting at whatever level, could be anywhere, including a board, get exposed, and then it gets momentum in a way that is impressive. So I think, at least from where I sit in the organization, being able to organize on those categories that we had talked about earlier is so important. And then, kind of understand what is unique and value adding about what we do in those categories. I mean, obviously, we are the source of, the original source of patient data. So for a lot of what needs to occur, we likely have a role, we or other academic or other medical centers. But I think driving it in those categories hopefully gets you down to the practical issues of again, things you can do better today, things that you couldn't do before. The ambient documentation, a lot of the great work happened right here in Massachusetts with Nuance. So anyways, I mean, that's our view. In the categories, the place to stay, don't, I think it's interesting. You go to innovation conferences. I'm en route to one in Texas later today. I can guarantee you, no matter what the subject is, there will be part of the discussion, whatever it is, staffing, the future of cancer therapy, there will be at least a segment in that conversation around generative AI.
Yeah, I think we all have to be incredibly skeptical. And, I've been a chief technology officer. I've run engineering teams. I'm probably the worst technology skeptic that's out there because I am just in disbelief that whatever somebody shows up with that they're promising is going to deliver in the way they actually say it is. I've been disappointed a number of times. I've laid off people because of it. I've gotten dangerously close to getting fired over it. It's burnt me too many times not to be a skeptic. And I think everyone has to continue to be a skeptic every single time you see a new thing show up. I got caught in this Watson swirl that was way back, like 15 years ago. And when that showed up, they said it was going to cure cancer right out of the box. That's what they were actually talking about. It was going to cure cancer. And I was like, really? Because I know how complicated this is. I have an extreme appreciation for what these guys go through on the day-to-day basis when they're actually dealing with this. And then we found out that this whole thing with Jeopardy, for example, in terms of the competition in Jeopardy, we found out that I didn't know this before, but 80% of all Jeopardy questions can be answered with the title of a Wikipedia article. That's how they won Jeopardy. That is not going to cure cancer, unfortunately. And I think you really have to, and it took a lot of courage sitting around the executive tables while we were being screamed at, like, why aren't you using this technology? And I was like, the technology doesn't do what you actually think it does. It takes a lot of courage, and you have to know the difference between, am I being courageous or am I being crazy? Or is there something I'm just not seeing here? But you have to be super, super diligent and disciplined. Do your own research. And I think just go into every single incremental step on this kind of like tech journey that we're all on in a very skeptical, kind of sober way. And I think that's going to set you free because you're going to pick the right things at that point in time. But just don't get caught in that thing where you're kind of chasing the shiny bulb.
And just to follow on Joe's comment, if you hear the Q word these days, you know, when we were talking about Watson curing cancer, it seems like those sentences now today have quantum in them. Right. And, give it some extra thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Quantum is, it makes its resurgence every couple of years when it pops back up again. And so, to close out, I think, imagine 5 years, we get this panel back together. What do you hope that we'll be talking about? Let's start with Joe.
I honestly hope we're not talking about AI. I'm hoping that we're going to get back to value and outcomes and just really focusing on the problems that we're trying to solve. And the one thing that I've tried to talk to my team about, we're the only people on the planet that care that the problem is actually being solved with AI, right? This could be gerbils on hamster wheels running in the background, producing an incredible value. Who cares if it's not high tech? Right? It just so happens we work in the high-tech industry, so we all stand on stages like this and go bananas about, AI. I'm hoping that we just return to this whole notion of we're trying to create outcomes, we're trying to create extreme value, and I think over the next 5 years, there's a ton of promise in terms of there's going to be a ton of value delivered. It's just going to show up in this kind of, it's not going to be this big bang type of a thing. You're going to see this creep into everything that you do. Intelligence is going to become more pervasive, more easy to access. It's going to start to embed, and we're going to stop, I think, talking about this standalone notion of AI is solving everything, and it's really a much bigger system.
Absolutely. I love the word outcome based in thinking about it. Chris, why don't you close this out?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's an excess of glamour that really probably is not helpful. I think Jensen Huang likes to say, AI is just software writing software. Get used to it. Yeah. And, how many people, get emotional over Lotus Notes now? It just went into the background. And, sorry. And, it's just a tool. And, but it is going to be omnipresent. It was interesting, 2 panels ago, obviously one of our surgeons was on that panel. To think about the xenotransplant, which is as big a game changer in medicine, assuming it stays in the path it's on, that you could imagine, still in the future. But there's an ML AI component to the work that eGenesis and others did to get that there. So it is, at least in terms of healthcare, things will be different across the board. I don't think ubiquity will have been achieved in terms of these technologies, but the utilization will be so much greater. And we expect more and more. And again, the point I was making, in academia and the way things get organized can have its inefficiencies, but one of the great virtues is you have so many really exceptional people that are right on the point of delivering care who can gain insights from that. And then given, the interface, we were, my physician colleagues were trialing all these technologies, all the generative AI technologies as they came along. So that those people are equipped to innovate right there, right on the spot. So that, the iterating of that will only accelerate. Again, I don't think 5 years is really a pretty short time in healthcare. But I think in, the lifetimes of all these people here, it's going to be, the changes are probably not even things that you could conceive today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thanks to Microsoft for sponsoring this fireside and to the Boston Globe for hosting the event.
Thank you. Very, very European to be meeting here in a bar, so nice to be with everyone.